impromptu, so thank you. But I really appreciate the kind introduction and the opportunity to speak here. I met you for the first time yesterday, and so this has been a whirlwind. So going from having coffee with Piero yesterday to speaking here at Laser, it's been a little bit astonishing, actually. So as Piero said, I'm a recent arrival to the Bay Area. I just arrived in October, and I'm at the Center for Design Research at Stanford University. A very fascinating place that looks at how designers do design from a research perspective. But I come to the Bay Area by way of Washington, D.C. I spent 8 years working at AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. It's a nonprofit organization. It's the largest multidisciplinary society in the world. Most people know about AAAS through Science Magazine. So AAAS publishes Science Magazine. If you receive Science Magazine in your mailbox, you're a member of AAAS. So I was there for 8 years working in the science policy arena. And I thought what I would do here is, rather than talk about the work that I'm doing at Stanford, which I have the great opportunity to talk about next month at the Stanford Laser, I want to share with you maybe some thoughts and experiences I had as someone who was an advocate for arts and science in Washington, D.C., particularly in the science policy arena. So the great thing about AAAS, as I mentioned, it's a large scientific society and a great platform for bringing the scientific community together to share ideas. So when I would say that during the 8 years I was there, art and science went from a completely non-existent topic to one that is gaining recognition, and I would say some considerable momentum. And so when I say art and science, I should say that, probably not needed for this, art and science, but it really is a collective umbrella term. And there was a cadre of us, I would say, in the DC area that were very interested in building a community of people who are interested in art and science, and also building awareness to the Washington, D.C. community to see this as a policy issue as well. So I would say that this cadre, or this community of us, represented the nonprofit sector like AAAS, the National Academy of Sciences, all the way to the executive level of federal agencies like the National Science Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as ultimately Congress and the STEAM caucus. So I'll talk a little bit about all of these things just very briefly. So this is a highly personal view, personal account, but I would say that the ground zero for the art and science discussion in DC really started indirectly from here. So Laser, which started off in the Bay Area, has a counterpart in DC called DASER, which is led by J.D. Talisic of the National Academy of Sciences. And that was really my first introduction to the art and science discussion. And he's really done a terrific job of creating and bringing together people from across the DC area, including policymakers, to really pay attention to this. And he started that about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's come a long way, and I'll talk about that in terms of where it's moved since then. At AAAS, we've organized 3 national symposia on this topic. And what I think what's really valuable here is the opportunities to bring artists and designers to a scientific venue so that we can start having these conversations. You know, as a science community, we're fairly insular. When we talk about interdisciplinarity, usually that means physicists talking to biologists, maybe even social scientists if you're lucky, but the discussion of art and design never really happens within the science community writ large. So I was very interested in having these conversations across our communities, and that was one of the real big impetus for bringing art designers to policy venues and national symposia at AAAS. The other movement that has been happening as well is at the funding level. So what I've been very inspired by are joint activities between the National Science Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts. They've co-sponsored several really nice workshops, 3 of them in total, looking at the connection between art, science, and technology. One of those workshops resulted in a really nice report. It's called the Harrell Report in BC, but it's authored by Fox Harrell from MIT. And in it, he talks about strategies for art and science research. What are the challenges and opportunities within? And that's become a really important seminal document that we've circulated within our circles. These workshops have also led to national networks. One is sponsored from the National Science Foundation called SEED, Science, Engineering, Art, and Design. This is primarily focused at the higher education level, so universities that are interested in creating support structures and awareness are part of this network. And in it, they've outlined certain objectives that they would like to see in terms of bringing broader recognition about the importance of funding this area and also creating institutional structures to support art and scientists that are working at the university level. The other aspect that's been interesting to see while I was in DC was Congress take notice of the connections between art and science. And this was spearheaded by 2 Congress people. One is no longer in Congress, but the other person is Suzanne Bonamici, a Democrat from she started the STEAM caucus, and it's really to bring members of Congress together. At last count, I saw that there were over 80 members of Congress who have joined the STEAM caucus, and what they're really interested in seeing the federal government play a role in advancing art and science. And so what would that look like? One of the products that they came up with was a House resolution. So this is a set of statements and ideas. It's not legislation yet. But in it, what they would like to do is encourage federal funding agencies like the NIH and NSF to start thinking about or encouraging art and design to be included in grants that support science. And that might seem like a small detail, but it's actually quite significant. If you know anything about how federal funding works, it's very decentralized. So if you're the National Institutes of Health, your mandate is to fund biomedical research, and going outside your lane is usually not allowed. And so the idea that you would also fund arts as part of an NIH grant gets into a controversial space. And so what the STEAM caucus came up with, which was this House resolution, was language that would allow places like the NIH to fund biomedical research that also include art and design as a component. I saw that as a really important statement that they made. And then if I were to just sort of close the loop in terms of where I saw art and science starting at the National Academies and where I see it today, what's really interesting to me is that the National Academy of Sciences, which is, really the premier organization, science organizations that are looked upon for advice and future directions. Their last Keck Futures Initiative, which is a series of forward-looking conferences, planning out what the future research agendas should be for the science community. Their last one that took place in November was on art, science, engineering, and biomedical research. And so that stamp of approval coming from the National Academies is quite notable, and to put money behind that as well, I think provides a nice, again, growing movement to hopefully be a model for perhaps other federal agencies to look at as well. So what are the issues and questions that come up when I say that we discuss these issues in a policy context? And I'll just go over a few, just as a way to maybe stimulate a discussion, because I think what I do want to impress upon is that I think the work that people are doing here is really, really important. The people in Washington often don't know about this work. And so making connections between what happens on the ground and sort of the decisions that being in Washington are really critical. And so I'm hoping that this might give you a bit more context for what you're doing here. So there is recognition that when we say arts and science, that this has implications on many aspects of society. So if we take the STEAM caucus, for example, they're very much interested in the connections between art and science and how that can lead to innovation and economic competitiveness for the U.S. They're also very interested in the K-12 education angle. There's also, I think, there's also a large movement to look at how art and science can come together to facilitate knowledge creation and to promote discovery and research. And there's also the importance of art and science coming together to promote. So I say this as a way to illustrate both the fact that this is a broad issue, and because it's such a broad issue, and each of these sub-issues are quite complicated, that it's often hard to create a movement with a single cohesive message, because art and science means different things to different people. So this is one of the ongoing challenges that we face as a policy issue, because there's so many different dimensions to the art and science movement. What struck me when I was looking at this and bringing people together for these national symposia is that this is a very grassroots effort. You know, people who are doing these types of interesting collaborations or interdisciplinary pursuits are doing it because it's their own personal interests, or it's their hobby. No one is asking this no one is mandating this from the top. And I find that really inspiring. And one of the challenges with that, of course, is that our institutional structures haven't quite caught up to this, both at the funding level and oftentimes at our universities. And so these are the issues that often come up in these discussions, is that we want to pursue more of this collaborative and creative types of work, but oftentimes we have difficulty finding funding to support it. Or, where do we publish a work that's not quite science, not quite art, but a blend of both? Where's the proper place where that can get exhibited or shared in a way that my peers can appreciate it? And of course, this leads to other issues about tenure and promotion policies at universities that also have a hard time recognizing the outcomes of this type of work. And so the last thing that I'll mention that's connected to both these issues is that anytime you create policies, policies require money. If you want money to support art and science, the question inevitably becomes, well, what's the evidence that this works? What are you trying to accomplish? What is the data? How do you evaluate this type of work? And these are all very difficult questions that there aren't really any clear answers for yet. And so that's where I would call upon this community and also our colleagues to help contribute to this and to help our members of Congress or our funders to say why this is important, why are we doing this, and what type of outcomes we are finding along the way. And this is an evolving process. This is very still early. There's still, I think, a building repertoire of these types of projects. And there's a lot of learning to be done, but I encourage all of us to share our stories because I can assure you that as much as art and science might seem obvious to this crowd and those that think like us, it's still a fairly foreign and abstract topic to most other people, including funders in the science community. So I don't think I need 20 minutes. I'll just leave it at that. And yeah, I would welcome your questions and your thoughts.